Alright, so this is my first upgrade for the final project for this class. So right here I just have my main.dart file. I haven't fully finished fleshing it out yet, but this is just what I've started out with. This is just importing the Flutter package from Material Dart, as well as just using a stateless widget to actually start it up. I'm using just the build function, using an override, and the title of this is Lone Hero. So because the whole purpose of this app is basically going to be a mobile app. It's going to be a game, basically using a game engine called Flame that is implemented using Flutter and being able to actually be implemented using Flutter. And that's just the title of the game that I've decided to go with, just called Lone Hero. And one of the files that I've had to implement was called globals. So basically, these are all the global variables that I've needed to use throughout this entire project. So I've been able to label out all the different types of globals that I've been using. So the time limit was just going to be like how long it takes for each of the sprites to actually move throughout the game. So I set the sprint step time to zero point 0.1 seconds. For the distance, I just set the maximum distance that you can actually be able to see is going to be 70 in front, and observe from the minimum amount of distance is going to be 30, as well as setting the radius vision to about 130 degrees basically. For the sounds, I've actually imported some of them. I'll show that in a little bit, but these are the sounds that I've implemented in that I imported once they can be used throughout the game. So I have a game over sound that's going to play once you lose in the game. I have a power up where if you pick up an item, then it makes a little sound. I have the success sound when you actually like clear a level throughout the game. I have an explosion sound, so when you hit something that blows up or you use a projectile that explodes, this sound would play. And I have a fire sound because there's going to be little sprites of fire throughout the map that'll just be playing, so you'll be able to hear that when you get near that. So for the size, this is for all the different items that's going to be in the game. So for item size, I set as 50. For the smaller items, I just made it half the size of a normal item, so about 25. And for the actual tiles, which is going to be something later on, but basically the tiles of each of the different spaces inside the map, I set to 32. And this is the player size, so it's going to be the default tile size times 1.5, just so you can able to actually see the player standing a bit bigger than the actual tile, so it doesn't just mesh in and you can't see the difference between a player and the tile. And for the dialogue box, which is going to be a little box to show for the commentary between characters, that's just set to 100. Now for the actual players, these are all the different types of players I'm going to be implementing inside the game. It's going to be a green ninja, a blue ninja, and a dark ninja, as well as an old man, which is basically just going to be like a guide pretty much to like give you clues and hints for that. There is going to be the two enemies for a demon cyclop, basically for the sprite, as well as the demon cyclop walk. So it's going to be two different types of strings I made. One for just the enemy just standing there still and static, so just demon cyclop idle, as well as when it actually starts to move towards the opponent, towards your character, so it'd be demon cyclop walk. So for the effects, these are going to be different actions that the player can take advantage of. So I have a cut, which is going to be like once they swing and hit an enemy or hits an object, what type of slash it'll make. Smoke is going to be just implemented throughout the map, as well as a different type of item you could use. An energy ball is going to be just one of the items that you can pick. A circular slash is another item that you'll be able to use, as well as a fireball that you can use as a projectile. So the actual items that are going to be available is going to be a med kit to actually heal you, a shuriken, a magic shuriken, which will just have a special ability that I'll be able to code in later on, as well as a sword that you'll be able to pick up and use as a weapon, and a single shuriken that just is by itself. It doesn't come with anything extra, as well as a coin that you could use to go to the old man and purchase different things and try and make him like a shop item manager slash like dialogue character to actually progress you throughout the map. And for the decorations, I have fire, which is just going to be like fire spread throughout the map, just in like different spots, just to give the map some extra pizzazz, just to make sure it doesn't look like too bland. And for the actual map, it's going to just be called map 1. I'm thinking of maybe trying to implement 2 maps once you actually finish the first level, and see if I can create another map as well. But for now, I'm just going to call it map 1. And the way I actually created this was using map1.json. Basically, I went to a website called tile.io, and that allowed me to actually create the map, which I'll get into a little bit later. And right here is going to be animation configurations. This is basically what's going to be when I actually implement all the actual animations for all these different objects. So when the character does a slash, or when he runs, or does sprint speed, and uses toxic character when he dies, if he throws something, if he breaks something. That's what this file is going to be inside of my constants folder. And I have actually finished the collisions.configurations. This is basically for anything that actually runs into each other. What is going to actually happen once they actually collide, so that they're actually in effect and doesn't just meld in together or just go through as if nothing was there to make it more solid. So I called it collisions configuration, and I use collisions, and I made the area of a circle just so it can cover all the distance around it. Made the radius 21 and a half. Then I aligned it to a vector of about 12.5 and 0, and that's for the actual player configuration for the collision. And on the bottom, I have the projectile collision configuration for all the different projectiles that's going to be hitting things. And it's basically the same thing, but for that, I made it a rectangle instead of a circle, and I made the width just divide by 2. And for the size, and then to align it, I just did the width times 2.5. And then the last thing on this is the pubspec.yaml. So this is where I actually had to import some of the packages. One of those being the Flame package, which is the actual game engine that I'm using that actually runs well with Flutter, as well as Bonfire, which is basically the way that I'm actually going to be able to get the fire, as well as some of the different types of sprites and animations to actually be used. And Flame Audio is going to be what I use to actually get the flames to actually make some sounds. So if we actually go to the PowerPoint, so this is in the beginning, this is the progress video, like I said, update 1 for Lone Hero. And in the actual summary, so the first thing I added was the global assets, the sprites and items. Added in the sprites, the characters that will be in the game, as well as the miscellaneous items that will be in the map. So like the fire, the med kit, the shurikens, the swords, stuff like that. So the way I found these were I just looked up online to try and find some different types of sprites that could be used. It took a while to actually find all these different types of items because there were so many different types, or I had to try to figure out how to actually pull them back into the actual app. It took me a while to actually figure out how to pull those in. So it took me about 3 hours to actually find all the different sprites and items and actually plug them into the app. The second thing was the imported files and the audios. So I imported the audio samples it'll play when called in the game, as well as the effects that the audios are used for, which are over here in audio. So I have all these different audio files. So I have an explosion, I have the fire effect, I have the game overs, I have the power up, and I have a success sound. So those are all the different sounds that actually plugged in, and that's where I use the tile.io. That's where I use for the file. I use that to actually pull up the map, which is right here. So this is the dungeon that I created. This is using the tile.io. Basically, it just gives you a giant grid of all these different tiles, and you're able to go in and list out how you want to lay out the actual map. And if we look here, this is what I use to actually space out all the different tile counts. So we have the image height for 896, the image width 128, and the tile count was 112. So that's how many actual tiles were actually used inside of this dungeon. And if we look through here, yeah, so this is the 113, the width and the height, to actually be able to implement all of the different things for the actual dungeon map. So going back to this, that basically took about 4 hours to actually pull the audios, as well as actually try and make the actual dungeon. That took the longest amount of time, just trying to actually get the correct shape and the actual implementation of all the different items that's going to be actually in the dungeon to make sure it all lined up properly. The third thing I did was collision configuration, which I mentioned before. I created a collision method for when objects come into contact with one another, as well as when the player comes into contact with other people. So that's where I use the bonfire pub.dev package. That's where that came in handy. It actually helps with being able to explain how to actually get the collisions to happen, as well as what interaction they would have when they hit. So that took me about 1.5 hours. And for the last thing was the reconfiguring of the pubspec.yaml. So I just took in all the dependencies to actually get the game engine Flame to actually run. And like I said, I used the Flame Audio pub.dev package. I used the Bonfire as well as the Flame package. That took about 30 to 40 minutes just being able to actually read through each of these packages, make sure I could actually use them and they were actually viable, and to see how and what they were actually able to do for me to actually use in the app. And that's everything that I've been able to upgrade in this point through the app.